Share my screen here, make sure. Let's see. Good to, can everybody see that?
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Noah, for inviting me. Uh, thanks for reading my blog. So I kind of just wanted to share that story a little bit more expounded. Let me see. Um, so basically I just called it from watermelon to watersheds. Just kind of my story from farming to where I'm at today. So, I'll tell you a little bit about my personal experience farming in San Antonio, um, and the picture of water's role in agriculture that I got from doing that work, and then how they all became interconnected through my work with NCAT, the National Center for Appropriate Technology. And then it's kind of a small group, which I'm kind of happy for because I didn't know for sure how long we were going to have for the interactive part, but I kind of want to learn from y'all too, and hear y'all's journey and what especially um, brought you to the Drought Learning Network part of this and the role of water. So I started farming. This wasn't my first farming experience, but this was kind of my first large scale farming experience. I worked at the San Antonio Food Bank. Um, we had 105 acres in two different locations, one right by the food bank and one on National Park Service land, for the mission system that was in San Antonio. There's five missions, and we were actually farming on the lower mission of the San Antonio River. Um, and I learned the tractor work and the farming part of it from a very uh, conventional vegetable farmer through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And what that's what these pictures kind of look like. Where it was just nice, neat rows, uh, plowed all the time in between rows, kept the weeds down that way. And the most that we had in water conservation was using plastic mulch, which I don't know how much water was conserved that way. Yes, it did. It increased more moisture retention by using it, but I don't know, how much water went into making that plastic and how much water went into getting it out on the ground. The overall picture of water conservation may not be as accurate as I thought, but we did it this way for a long time, especially since we were kind of a botanical farm, meaning that there was a lot of visitors. We had 6,000 volunteers a year. And so a lot of people had eyes on our farm. So we kept it nice and neat and, made sure there was no tripping hazards and all that kind of stuff. A little bit out of the norm for regular farming. But we did it and we got to bring in a lot of produce. This is like, I think this was close to 16,000 pounds of butternut squash that we got to bring in one weekend on a Saturday. So everything that we grew at the farm went into the warehouse and got distributed to all the local people in need in San Antonio. And we had rainwater collection tanks that were installed as part of kind of green initiatives for the city of San Antonio. It held 700,000 gallons of water, and it was all collected from roof runoff. About two-thirds of the roof there at the food bank could collect this water. And so every inch of rain, we collected about 165,000 gallons of water from that roof. But there was one problem that when the rainwater collection tanks were full, it also meant that it had been raining. And so that's when we needed water the least. And when we needed water the most was when it hadn't been raining and our um, water source was empty. So we did have a way to still fill it with municipal water. And slowly over time, as we increased the operation, we became the second most consumer of municipal water in the seventh largest city in the US. So we were using a lot of water to do this. And Like I said, we also use the San Antonio River water. We utilize the Sakia and flood irrigation, as well as a irrigation pump that came straight out of the Sakia to water our big fields. Those acequias were built in the 1700s and maintained with the first Spanish settlers. Um, but it wasn't always easy to do that. There was some weird downfalls that came with that territory of just having it as a learning experience for the city of San Antonio as well. So anytime that, water, if the acequia wasn't looking as neat as it needed to be, they would shut our water off and we'd have to go weeks without water, sometimes months. There was a few times that it was 2 to 3 months without water. And so, yeah, we just I started learning and adapting my farming methods to these two scenarios of where water scarcity was the critical challenge that was affecting us. And so then there came a time about a year in that there was a kind of an emotional impact of this water scarcity for me, especially on this day that you see here down on the bottom left. 440 volunteers showed up to pick about 79,000 pounds of cabbage, including this green row right here was a row of 90 kindergartners from El Paso that came all the way to San Antonio and helped line these cabbages into the bins here. And it was a very cool day because, so many people came out to help us, and that 79,000 pounds of cabbage like literally went onto the trucks out at the road and then were distributed that same day. So we got to feed hungry people with the cabbage that was picked that day. So it became very rewarding for sure. And then my beautiful daughter was born, and so there became like an emotional connection there as well to make sure that I was being a good land steward for the future as well. Thinking about the health of the soil, especially, any chemicals that I brought home on my clothes. Things like that went through my mind at that time. And so I implemented the first cover crop. This was actually, I couldn't find a picture of it brand new, but this was actually, we had 290 to 310 growing days a year in San Antonio. So this was actually the first mowing of a cover crop, but that was the very first cover crop that was implemented at the San Antonio Food Bank. So instead of just constantly tilling our bare ground that wasn't being planted in vegetables, um, I was actually able to start covering it. But at that point, I was doing it with just a old school seeder and tilling right before we seeded. So then there was some, wanted to try to put some uh, of my links into the chat as well. Let me do that real quick. Can look at them whenever I want to. Sorry, I thought this was going to be smoother, but it is not showing me. There it is. Okay, sorry, having to figure out the two different screens and all that. So yeah, I just posted the two watermelon blogs into the chat that we talked about earlier. Um, and so my journey kept going, thinking about all these things, and I wanted to just keep pushing the envelope farther. And especially, it was a July day when we were harvesting watermelon that we were sitting down with my coworkers, and we started discussing more and more ways to conserve resources and to better our land and to reduce inputs at the same time. And so in these pictures that you see, now we started utilizing, this is a peach orchard, a five acre peach orchard that was just planted. And we started getting free mulch. We heard that there was mulch from the city that they wanted to get rid of. So we started utilizing that to put down them as the mulch beds. We were cover cropping in between rows. The city actually contacted me and said, "Hey, we're shutting down our composting operation. We're selling it to somebody else. We have tons of truckloads of compost available. Do you want it?" And I was like, "Yes, I definitely want it." Um, and so they dropped it all off, and I got to spread that out on the field. I mean, it was this. What you see here is the first truckload being dumped. I think there was mm, about 60 more trucks after that. So it was a lot of compost. I mean, there was areas that there it was like 6 inches deep in compost that are still. I drive by there today, and I mean the differences in sites where there's 6 inches of compost versus not is pretty uh, immaculate still today. And then we started doing things like the even interseeding pollinators in between, doing a lot of the traditional knowledge practices that were talked about but were never really used at scale. And so I started even doing that. And then, by this time, I had kind of gotten a commitment to this sustainability. Those are the water tanks behind us that and the roof system that was catching it. And so I wanted to keep it growing. I wanted to move towards no-till and strip-till for the vegetable farming. And so I built a roller crimper from an old bed roller that we had and, welded it all myself and rolled this down. And then we got grants to get a new tractor that was sized for this amount of work, as well as a no-till planter. And I started no-till seeding into this so that, again, we had 5 fields like this that were 5 to 7 acres at the mission system. And 4 of them at a time would have to be, just we would have to till it, go disc it every, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months or so, depending on the rain. And it was always bare ground. And so now I was actually putting matting cover crop over it and then seeding right back into it and planning the time around crop rotation instead of using my time to go disc the field. And we saw immaculate results where just the soil health got better, organic matter got better, plant health got better, and we were not using near as much water. We weren't having to continuously pump. And right towards the end of me being there, we had started getting into strip tilling with the vegetables. So I created some 12-inch wide, uh, 36-inch on center tools that would actually help me, put 4 rows of just cultivate 12-inch rows in this matted down system of the old cover crop. And so we were planting directly in this, and therefore we didn't have to cultivate afterwards that near as much either, because the living mulch was down there, or the terminated mulch was down there. And at this time, um, as I was implementing these new practices, there was also uh, a lot going through my mind and just wanting questions to answers that hadn't been thought of before, especially at this size of doing the strip tilling. And I got a lot of those resources from NCAT and ATRA. ATRA is the technical assistance providing portion of NCAT. And one of my friends from college actually worked there from Texas State University, and she calls me up one day and says, "Hey, NCAT's hiring." And so I kind of heard what they were working on at the time, and I jumped on it. And the first big project I came in, and I think I was doing uh, 11 different projects at the time. But the first project that I came into was the Soil for Water project. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with the Soil for Water project, but I'm gonna put it into the chat as well here. Okay, getting a little bit faster at that. Sorry for the time there. Um, but in that soil for water project, we were talking about capturing and holding more water into a soil sponge, focusing on the soil health and specifically the peer-to-peer network behind it. Networks like this where it's peers learning from peers. That was the quickest way to adoption we found in that project was producers learning from other producers, not necessarily from experts or from um, government programs or anything like that. It was actually from themselves. Once they found out that somebody else like them was doing it, they wanted to try it as well. And I got to see many, many super cool things during that time. Um, you know, this was a project in Colorado where he had installed like 25 acres of solar panels, and he was doing all kinds of research underneath it with universities, from vegetable plantings to trying to grow C3 grasses for grazing, cool season grasses, um, utilizing the drip uh, coming off the panels to conserve, I mean, to water and hold water at those drip edges. A lot of cool things. And I got to see some, that was like new practices. I got to see some old practices as well, like draft animals and doing, adapting the same things that I was talking about, like strip tilling, but trying to do it with draft animals. So that was cool. And then there was evidence of things as I traveled that just things were not clearly working, clearly weren't working. In this picture right here, this is the bar ditch right next to a cotton field in the panhandle of Texas, where I drove through. And as I was driving, entered a dust storm that I could barely see, had to pull over for like 2 hours until I could see. And I took this picture after it all cleared out the next morning and just you could just see the terrible erosion that was happening in these fallowed cotton fields. And then that project actually added a next level of like the regenerative grazing practices. We had a NRCS portion of that project that was all talking about regenerative grazing. And so that again added to my thinking, my thought patterns, it returned me to grazing. I had cowboyed right before college, so it kind of returned me to a world that I had been a part of. I got to meet some more interesting folks, Jeremiah Eubanks, uh, Pepe Martinez, grazing lands for our grazing specialist for NRCS. Lori Salela is behind this picture next to this guy herding these sheep. Credible people. And as we talked more about the grazing methods and we were talking more about the restorative health benefits of the soil and just how it improved the sustainability in farming and ranching, especially during drought times and that resilience. And so we did get some case study material out of that. Let me put it in the chat as well. Go. Um, but yeah, that kind of started opening my eyes to this integration of animals, or at least animal feces, into other operations as well. And so started getting a fuller picture of what drought resilience in the Southwest could look like. And then just seeing these wide variety of places in the Southwest and West made me more aware of drought and how practices and principles made the difference. So the principles, understanding the principles of soil health really, when once it, takes hold of your practice implementation, you could see the difference in two lands that were taken care of differently in different management practices. And so I put these pictures here. This is in some of my monitoring that I did. This picture here and this picture on the left, these were only maybe 19 miles apart as the crow flies, only had a difference of zero point 0.2 inches of rain, and this one in the center actually had the zero point 0.2 inches more of rain, but uh, it was all the grazing practices. This one did not destock. in the time of drought, continued at normal stocking rates, and you can see what happened. It overgrazed vegetation, left a lot of bare soil. Whereas this, same amount, same year, 1 day apart, lots of vegetation on the ground still, and a lot more soil moisture still retained in that. And then the same thing, a week later, I went to Servando Leal's down in South Texas. He had about the same amount of rain, and look, we were knee deep in that grass. And he was actually running a switchback system that was, he just stocked it appropriately and just moved them back and forth, back and forth. It wasn't even really a multi-paddock grazing operation, but he still saw incredible results from just that. Oh, let me put in my uh, blog real quick for that as well on drought. So here I just wanted to kind of take a break from me talking and kind of get a group activity going. Um, I'm going to put 2 questions in the chat as just kind of a prompt question. And then if y'all want to, feel free to take yourself on mute. But I kind of wanted to just take a second to learn from y'all and put in the chat or come off mute. But yeah, I just wanted to hear like when did water become a personal story for you? That's kind of what I'm sharing today. So I just wanted to hear from y'all, see what I could listen and understand and learn more. And what's one change you've made because of drought or water scarcity? Anybody want to come off mute and talk about their story?
Hey, yeah. Um, that's not much of a story, but my family has a really small farm. I actually live in Colorado. I'm in the southeastern portion, which is a fairly arid. They call it semi-arid, but some years it's more arid than others. Anyway, so we have just a very small family farm, and on those really dry years, there is hardly enough water to do much of anything, and even just pasturing, it's difficult, and so. We've been just working a little at a time to kind of increase our diversity in plant species and just till as little as possible. And so just, disturb the soil as little as possible to try and hold as much moisture as we can.
Okay. Christy, have you been out to Jack's solar garden? That one that I showed?
I haven't been up there, but I do know a lot about it. It's becoming a pretty hot topic in Colorado, agrivoltaics.
Okay.
And I think he's got a variety of different things going on his farm right now, and I think he might be transitioning to some perennial crops to see how those work under solar panels. So,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
Thanks, Christy. Anyone else want to come off mute and tell me about their personal water story? Looks like Mark's coming.
Yeah, I could. So I'm not a farmer. I was for a little while in the 80s, and went to graduate school instead. But I work for the on a research center on a large cattle ranch in southeastern Utah, and we had a really bad summer. But one of the things I've been noticing is that the a lot of the first place we turn to is the infrastructure solutions. You know, so and I've studied how farmers and drought rancher response to drought for a long time, and people, okay, where can I put more water? We spent some time this summer lining stock ponds with bentonite to be able to keep more, and we got some funding from NRCS to put in a center pivot, a place where we'd been using wheel line before. And I think it's interesting that I hear people talk about regenerative grazing, and a lot of the examples I hear are from places like Texas, or Chihuahuan Desert, places where that don't have as much shrubbery, or that have San Antonio's got twice as much rainfall as we do.
Hmm.
And I'm really curious about how we can find stories for, the Colorado Plateau region of the Southwest, because it feels like um, maybe we don't have enough ranching to make it worth people focusing attention on it. We don't produce a whole lot of cattle. We have a lot of ranch land, got a lot of grazing land, but we're not important economically to the rest of the country. And so I'm kind of interested to learn. It's one of the reasons why I'm in this group, is to learn more about what people are trying in more marginal landscapes like ours.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm still in that journey too, and I'll get to it in a second, especially in New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas in the project that I'm working on now, and just uh getting some more of those personal stories and success stories of what's working on the ground in the environments that need it the most.
Thanks.
Christy, I saw you come off. If you want to share your story.
Sure. I am an urban grower. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and so I don't grow on big scale. I have a quarter of an acre with fruit trees and perennial crops and also annual vegetables. And so in one way, I was acutely aware of water because I use, chlorinated municipal water for all of my irrigation. So that's just a dollar amount sort of thing. And then, of course, I've lived in Salt Lake long enough to know I've shoveled less and less snow in most years and that there is less and less water. And so then the question became like, is this even responsible for me to be using this water to grow food? It's for my family. I give lots away. Like, it's generous, but is it also the responsible thing to be doing? So I started really looking into ways to both conserve water in the soil and also capture rainwater, use water that wasn't coming from my city pipes, and thinking about how to build more drought resilience in my own landscape. And then that's also led to the work that I do working for a nonprofit that's a community gardening organization. I'm as just maybe a agricultural nerd, I'm super curious about helping people in the Great Basin area where Mark is think about how we do this differently, right? Like, can we produce food? Can we conserve landscapes? So I think of it on both scales, but I think I first came to it in the realization that I was like paying a lot of money for drinking water
Hmm.
when I probably should be doing something different. Like, what can I push um, in my practices that isn't just more water? So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks,
I'm
Christy.
really impressed with your work at the food bank. That's fantastic, by the way. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah, thank you. And I was actually an urban grower too, believe it or not. I was like inside the Loop 410. Like we were in the middle of a neighborhood, like literally. And my biggest pest problem was the neighborhood dogs, especially on that plastic mulch. Ooh, when they saw that white plastic mulch, they wanted to run all over it, and I would have holes all over
I had a peacock problem at one of my sites. Like, they are a nightmare.
it. Yeah, I mean that's definitely great. Out of all the places that I've been and I've got to travel with NCAT, and including, you'll see in where I went to South Africa here in a second. Um, I would not be worried about growing food and the responsibleness of water, it is far more responsible to do that than it is to leave your water on the entire 3.5 minutes that you're brushing your teeth. Like there's what I'm trying to say is like there's other things that are far greater wastes than providing necessities like food to people. Um, and it's just our as land stewards, we just have to focus on like, well, maybe I shouldn't grow varieties that need a whole bunch of water in a landscape that doesn't have water. I'll just adapt and choose varieties or, plants that need to utilize less but still provide the same amount of nutrition or food value. Um, so yeah, great. I know I wanted to keep this to 45 minutes, so I'm gonna go ahead and chug on here. Thank you for everyone for sharing that came off. Um, Let me go to the next one here. So then I wanted to kind of add this in as well. This was, I also did some what they carbon farm planning. I don't know if anybody's heard of CCI, Carbon Cycle Institute out of California. I got to do a training with them and I did helped with two different carbon farm plans in the state of Texas. I wrote one of them uh, for Matt Simon here in the picture. That's Matt Simon. He works for the Refugee Collective and does like an incubator farm, 20-acre incubator vegetable farm uh, with refugees coming out of Houston and Austin. Um, and then, he had this field up at the top of his land that was kind of sloped. It was about 8% slope. And at the top, he just couldn't grow anything. And so we actually did this carbon farm plan for him. And he started doing cover cropping. He started adding compost. And he still texts me pictures to this day, 3 years later, of all the amazing things that he's growing in that space that wouldn't grow anything before. And so that training kind of enhanced my understanding of carbon as well. And that every time that we talked about carbon in the soil, we were talking about soil health principles that also increased water, just capturing it and holding it longer. And so there was just kind of a interconnectedness there. And also on Matt's farm, that 20 acres was just a part of the farm that was leased to him from a good Samaritan that was there in his part of the world in Elgin, Texas, and he was the lower part or the upper part of a 400-acre watershed called the Plum Creek Watershed. And the changes that he made, people started noticing differences in that watershed, and so that really opened my eyes to bigger, more interconnectedness to our watersheds, our neighborhoods, the people around us, and what we do matters to them as well. Let's go. There it goes. And also during that time, like I learned that no matter what our land management, like no matter what our operations are, our enterprises that we choose, there's always some type of integrated land management that we can do that improves the ecosystem services as well as increases climate resilience on farms. So no matter if you're, agronomic crop grower, here you can see that they did some strip tilling and left residue down. So at least they were doing something to increase residue on the surface to decrease um, soil erosion. But we were also, we talked to forestry specialist. This guy right here is amazing. He's at the Wendell Berry Center for Forestry. Amazing person. And even if you're doing just like a layer operation, this layer operation here in outside of Austin, takes all this and composts it and puts it into their fields. And then these chicken houses are movable. The entire 4,000 layers that are in here, the whole house moves down these big pathways. They figured out how to move those systems. Just amazing operations, and just each one, it just kept going back to the soil health, water, and the principles that we turned into practices to meet those goals of the business owner and grower. Let's see, did it change? Yeah. Um, and I'll provide some more resources here real quick, more along that carbon farm planning and climate resilience. Ooh, where did it go? I know I'm throwing a whole list of reading material at y'all, but that's what NCAT does. We create resources for education. So sorry, not sorry. Um, so I just wanted to kind of show you, again, saw some more amazing places that just complex environmental challenges around them. During the Biden administration, we really got it into the climate smart agriculture world, and we were working on a lot of projects on that. But this trip to South Africa, this was, uh, here, a conventional crop advisor talking with a technical assistance provider for sustainable agriculture, talking with a pastor slash farmer in South Africa. And they were doing, some incredible things of collecting leaves off of the jacaranda trees from the city and bringing them out here to mulch and compost and mulch their tomatoes inside this greenhouse to have season extension, doing a lot of amazing things. And again, it just compounded all these things that I've been learning to where this issue, even though we're here today at the Southwest drought, there are places that have the same thing, same amount of rainfall that these principles and practices and soil health factors are kind of universal, no matter where we're at. And to me, that kind of brought it all back together of just holism is the key to addressing drought. Holistic approaches are that key, when we're thinking about not only our operations, but the things around us, the neighborhoods around us, the watersheds around us, the aquifers underneath us. It all kind of should be part of your planning and think about it in ways that are also going to meet your goals, um, and your enterprise, worth and business model, but also the ecosystem around us. And that can make the impact on the resilience to drought and other related effects. So that, those are just pictures of these are some cucumbers that I grew, and this is flower production with cover crop in between, right next to a vegetable farm. Like that was just, constantly rotated. And I even got to see the tribal buffalo project here in Texas, where a lot of, you know, conservation methods and things, always gets brought back to we should do things like how uh, the buffalo had an impact on our land, and that might be some regenerative practices as well. But I got to see that here locally, and that was pretty cool. So last thing I wanted to talk about, just the project that I'm doing now, the Abundant Ogallala project. I can share the website real quick. You can definitely learn more, but basically this project just focuses on enhancing water conservation and agricultural resilience in the Ogallala Aquifer region. Specifically, what we're working on now is New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas, where lesser prairie chicken habitat overlaps the Ogallala Aquifer recharge zone. And so we're kind of emphasizing the community-based approaches, adaptable strategies tailored to that local environmental challenge, and then, implementing practices and then seeing how much water is conserved. We report that back to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, who's our funded the project, and also at the same time thinking about that habitat for the lesser prairie chicken. And so we're just writing conservation plans for producers, and that is the main help that we're trying to provide is just providing those developed, tailored plans that promote sustainable agriculture practices in drought-prone areas. And then that drought plan, that conservation plan provides detailed information about the goals, practices, and opens doors to funding. So like we don't have a right now we don't have funding to get people to implement the practices, but we take them 80% of the way there. We get them, to where they can take it to an NRCS and go get funding that way, or all the different projects that are programs out there and organizations out there that are helping lesser prairie chicken habitat. They have funding projects. So we get their conservation plan really far into it to where they have a plan, they're going to meet their goals and get support by opening doors to funding. All right. I think that is it. Any questions or anything? Or I turn it back over to Noah. My email address there is there. My project email address is there. That's my cell phone number as well. I am paid to provide technical assistance. So anybody that or needs wants to talk to me, feel free to give them my information.
It's fantastic, Darren. Thank you so much. Excellent fit for the Southwest Drought Learning Network and the kinds of things we're interested in. Um, I'll ask a question, and maybe others will have some more questions. I'm thinking about like cover crop and low till, no till seems to be like one of the things that you've had great success with. One thing that often comes up in those discussions is the trade-off of usually means, bumping up your herbicide use to terminate the cover crop. And so, there's critiques of these practices saying like, maybe that trade-off isn't worth it. So I'm just wondering like what you found in when you were implementing that practice and how you think about that trade-off.
Yeah, absolutely. I have thought about that trade-off a lot, and I especially 105 acres of vegetables is a large scale vegetable operation. But when we talk about large scale, like agronomic sizes, we're talking tens of thousands of acres, if not hundreds of thousands of acres at a time. And so there's just no, uh, affordable technology that is gonna, you can't go weld together a roller crimper and do this all yourself on that size scale. So there's some trade-offs at that level, but at my level and below, I think it still can be done, and especially again just choosing the right things. So like I said, when we had like a 280 to 310 day growing cycle, I just had to keep that in mind. Like I had to make sure that I was going to choose the right cover crop that was easily terminated somehow, some way. Like if I was going into cool season, I knew for a fact that it was going to die in the first frost, and then I would roller crimp it down and just leave that there. If I was doing it in the spring and summer seasons, uh, I had to plan for it just to make sure I knew that crop was probably going to be there for 310 days at the minimum. And so any of the as I said, like planning that crop rotation, I just planned where something that was going to die sooner, maybe not the best cover crop mix of like providing all the beneficials of cover crops that they do, but just making something that's going to be easily terminatable without herbicide. At the food bank, I did not use any herbicide to terminate my cover crops. It was all the roller crimper method that you saw, and then whatever was left over, even in some of those, like you saw the green kind of going through those roller crimped aisles of wheat. That green was already like some of the sunflowers coming back up. And so I would still have to go out there, with myself and the crew and or volunteers and just hand pick those if I wanted those gone. Um, Again, can that happen at a 60,000 acre corn field? probably not. So yeah, there's just again, that's the most important thing of this interconnectedness is just understanding what your goals are, what size you're at, like what's your enterprise, like putting all that back together to really focus on what you can and can't do, what would be successful, what would be the appropriate technology for you to use in your situation.
I have a quick question regarding like when you initially did your or started your cover crops, did you have to account for using extra water to get them going? Obviously, over time we know that cover crops will help to increase soil moisture content, but just on that initial, when you started first using them, did you have to use a little extra water to get them going, or how did that kind of work with your soil types and whatnot?
Yeah, excellent question. So we had uh, black gumbo, Houston black gumbo clay, super heavy clay, uh, and the very first cover crop that I did, yeah, I was worried about providing moisture to it right away. And then I started just kind of learning from my experience. And so that very first time I got lucky in that there was like a old high school that was going, being renovated, and they had a water wheel or a what am I trying to say? It watered it was like a retractable hard hose reel that watered their, 100 acres long by 30 feet wide. And I used that hard hose reel to water my very first cover crop in. And yeah, it took a lot of water. And so from then I became like this weather watcher. I would have seed ready for around about the time that it needed to go in, but I wasn't on like a set date, like a lot of around here it's like February 15th, you got to get the corn seed in, like no matter what, like that's the day that you got to put it in. I wasn't like that at all. I had a roundabout time period, and then I just became a weather watcher and I waited for the next rain to come. And when I knew it was coming, I was, headlights on, planting cover crop seeds until 10 p.m. at night. Um, and from then on, I just got lucky. God provided rain every time that I planted a cover crop, and it brought it up. And once it was up, once it had that first growth, it was kind of adapt or die at that point. If it didn't make it, uh, maybe I needed to choose a different variety next time. And so I just kind of learned from every time that a failure like that happened and adapted the next time. And so no, after that first one, I never used our water for the vegetables that was meant for the vegetables to water a cover crop up. I just used precipitation.
Um, in your experience, so one of the things that we've been trying is using ground-based remote sensing technologies to, you know, really focus in on moisture, soil moisture, uh, and monitor our hook it to our irrigation so that we're reducing, keep minimizing the amount of water that we use. I'm wondering, do you find that people are going to those kinds of precision farming technologies, or is it more the people you work with mostly trying um, more, I don't know what you call, maybe more natural solutions, more, yeah.
Yeah, I see both ways, Mark. Honestly, like the people that we work with mostly at NCAT are probably the small to medium sized scale. So yeah, I usually see kind of like that sustainable regenerative, practices type implications. But I'm also just a part of the ag network here. I mean, and I see large scale farmers for sure are utilizing agronomic crop growers for sure are utilizing that. Even large scale ranches are using those ground monitoring. And one of the 16 ranches that I monitored had two of those underneath each transect, and so we compared the data of that, and it was actually at that site that I showed the picture of where it was a side by side of, 20 inches of rain here and 20.2 inches of rain 19 miles apart, and the vast difference between those. That one with cover actually had water sensors underneath. And it was kind of funny. He was like, well, I kind of wasted my money here because it's not really helping me. But I was like, well, it's the fact that you have been this curious so long that has adapted your principles in your mind to adapt your practices. And that's what, even though like, yeah, maybe you spent $500 on each sensor, that's what made the difference was that your curiosity, your ability to learn from it and adapt to it. Um, that's what helps him as a manager as much. But for sure on the large scale, I see that a lot, and even I would say in the mid scale, maybe not. I started doing it when I was farming, but uh, I think y'all have it on y'all's website as a resource, the Open ET. I use that all the time because basically what I would try to do is I knew all the calculations for my drip irrigation and what it was going to output, and all I did was replace what the evapotranspiration was. I never went over it. I stayed even with it. So I could just keep up with it. And that helped tremendously in just making sure that I wasn't overwatering and I wasn't underwatering. Just keeping track of that open ET every day that I watered was like the best way to make sure that I was saving what I could. And I see that a lot at the mid scale size.
All right. Final thought, final question, anybody? All right. If not, we'll say thank you to Darren. Again, really fantastic conversation. And we have his contact. And so, the whole point is to be a peer-to-peer learning network. So, a great point of contact at NCAT for any future collaboration. And yes, if nothing else, we'll see you guys in 2 months with LaDonna Clayton. And I will upload this recording to YouTube, to the Drought Learning Network YouTube channel, and share it with those who missed. So thanks very much for showing up, everybody.